them in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I am with you always, to the very end of the age.
Hey, good morning. Today we're going to start a new series. It's only really 2 weeks, so it's kind of like a mini series, I guess you could say. But I want to talk about this thing called discipleship because I think I want to start this morning with something that I just don't like because we got beat. We got beat bad, right? And I hate losing, and this was sort of a blowout. The church, not just GatheringPoint, the church, the entire Church of America got out-discipled the last couple years. And we've been trying to figure this out, and we've been trying to look at this. And so just to start, a disciple of Jesus is a person who's following with the intent to live their life like Jesus, to love people, to see people the way that Jesus would like to be loved, the way that they did. And we were out-discipled. I mean, we got beat handily 2 years ago by Fox News and by CNN. They made more disciples than we did. They had more passionate followers willing to risk the status quo for a belief system. And quite honestly, it was polarizing to watch. They had followers who saw people and they responded to people the way that they were reporting. And we weren't exempt here. I'll just be honest with you. Let me just give you some real uncomfortable stats. We here at Gathering Point lost 50% of our small groups during that season. Because where 2 or 3 were gathered, 7 opinions were present. And everyone was right. And everyone felt like it was their duty to correct the wrong. Both sides, because they'd been discipled to believe. Both through the media, both through social media. They had been indoctrinated into a form of thinking, and they were disciples. And then, to make matters better, the pandemic hit. Masks hit, quarantines, closings, work from home, learn from home, flatten the curve. You didn't even remember that one, did you? You forgot about flatten the curve. Oh yeah, I forgot we're flattening the curve, right? More closings. And then this happened, right? You remember this? Jesus would wear a mask. And then there was, Jesus would have faith over fear. Remember those? Now, Jesus didn't actually say either one of those things, but I heard that he did say a lot of those things. And in the meantime, we got torn apart. Now what? And all churches have taken their lumps, so we at Gathering Point have decided to look at this. And we've been looking at this for over a year. We're not real reactionary people. We want to pause and kind of look at this. We've been trying to look at this again with fresh eyes. And it's taken over a year to do this. And so we're kind of going back to what is a Christian? But more importantly than what a Christian is what's a disciple of Jesus Christ? So what comes to mind when you hear that word? If you were to be asked, are you a Christian? Would you straight up say, yeah, I'm a Christian? Well, let's qualify that, because the last guy I talked to yesterday said, well, I don't know. I think I'm really more spiritual. Which I didn't even have the energy at that point yesterday to be like, what's that mean? Right? So if you were raised in a church like I was, you became a Christian at the moment you prayed a prayer, right? That's when you became a Christian. And for some of you, it was through baptism. Other you through confirmation. Some of you feel like you became a Christian through your first communion. And you would say that's what made you Christian, right? That's what they did. And so case closed. I don't even know why we're talking about this. I mean, I'm Christian. Why are you Christian? Well, because I'm not Muslim. Okay, so that's why I'm a Christian. And so, we look at this. And so then some of us grew up thinking that our brand of Christianity was the most right brand, right? Everybody else was just those Protestants. Everybody else was those Catholics or those liberal Episcopalians or those narrow-minded Baptists or those conservative Nazarenes or those money-hungry, ego-driven megachurches, right? They're not real Christians. And then some of you said, I don't know if I'm Christian anymore. And then some of you said, well, you can't say that. You can't used to be Christian. Once in, always in. And then some of you grew up hearing, once in, not always in. And you lived in fear. of not knowing if you were in. Especially after you went to that not-so-Christian party or you went on that not-so-Christian date. And you were terrified if the hell, you driving home and the hell's fire would come and consume you and burn your flesh, right? For some of you, it's all about what you believe that makes you a Christian. And that's where you were taught. If you have the correct beliefs, that's what makes you a Christian. For others, it's not that at all. It's how you behave. How you behave is whether or not it makes you good or not. Others would say, I hate Christians. They're judgmental, homophobic moralists who think they're the only ones going to heaven and secretly relish in the fact that everyone else is going to hell. So there might be some truth to that. I bet if I have seen what you've seen, and I bet you if I had heard all the things that you have heard and experienced, I may think and feel the same way. And so over our lifetimes, we've been told and we've been taught and we've assumed and we've heard conversations and we kind of are interested to say and to do this. So we're stepping back from all of that and go, okay. That's a big gobbledygook mess. So what's a disciple? What are the irreducible minimum? What's a disciple? And what helps you to grow and become or to be made into a disciple? Because this term Christian that we see in the New Testament, you may be surprised, this whole faith thing, maybe just surprised what's in the Bible and what's not in the Bible. Here's the thing, this is going to be shocking for some of you, and you probably need to go back and look it up because you're going to be like, that's not true. Okay, well, you can look it up then. In the Bible, nobody prays a prayer to become a Christian in the Bible. No one is baptized to become a Christian in the Bible. And there weren't any brands of Christianity in the Bible. And nobody went around and been like, well, I'm more right than you are. And so, in fact, most people hated Christians. And it's not because they felt judged by them. That wasn't the reason they hated Christians. They hated them because they felt like they were a threat to the ancient pagan religions. They felt like they were a threat to Judaism, and they kind of get into this mess, and that's why people hated Christians. It wasn't because of how they behaved or the way that they believed. That's not why they were hated at all. They were a threat to pagan religions and to Judaism. So here's what I want to do. I want to jump into the book of Acts, because I can already tell you are on pins and needles. I'm good. Are you good? Let's go. Acts chapter 11, we have this persecution that breaks out in the church, and the Christians, after the persecution breaks out, the Christians flee up to Antioch, like Asia Minor, Turkey, and they begin telling Greeks about Jesus, and all of a sudden these Greeks start to believe in this, and the apostles sent Barnabas. They sent Barnabas up to go check it out, and so he needs a little help, so he went to Tarsus to go get the guy named Paul. So Acts chapter 11, verse 25, this is what we have. Then Barnabas went to Tarsus to look for Saul. When he found him, he brought him to Antioch. So it was there for an entire year. Barnabas and Saul met with the church, and they taught a great many people, and it was in Antioch. This has been going on for a while. In Antioch is the first time these people are called Christians, which means to be associated with Christ. They themselves didn't call themselves Christians. They were first called this in Antioch. That label was put on them. Now, we know about this because Tacitus is a first century historian. He dies a little after 100 AD, and he kind of writes about 4 or 5 Roman emperors. And one of the emperors he writes about is Nero, and Nero did this extraordinary thing in 64 AD. He wanted to rebuild the city of Rome, but the problem was that there was already a city, and so he got this bright idea, which emperors are known for getting bright ideas, and then they have the power to do it, and they don't have to go through a legislative process. There's no red tape when you're an emperor. You just like think it and it happens, right? So he gets the bright idea. You know what? I want to rebuild the city of Rome. But there's already a city. I know. Let's burn it down. Which was a great idea, except it wasn't. Except for then, people's homes and some of their businesses got burned that he didn't want to have burned. And now he has a problem because everybody wants to know who started the fire. And so Nero says it was the Christians who started the fire. He decided to make up a lie and said, consequently, so here's the report from Tacitus. He says, consequently, to get rid of the report, Nero fastened the guilt and inflicted the most exquisite tortures on a class hated for their abominations called Christians by the populace. So this is when it really becomes a name, Christian. It was these people, and Nero needed a scapegoat, and they were easy. So he continues, Tacitus continues in his report. He says, Christus, from whom the name had its origin, suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius at the hands of one of the procurators. But before they got this nickname Christian, when they referred to themselves and they wrote about themselves, they used a different term. They used the term disciple. Disciple. They called themselves something far more terrifying than Christian. Far more convicting than Christian. They called themselves disciples. Now here's what makes this terrifying. If I were to go row by row and interview one person per row, and I would say, give me your definition of what a Christian is, we would have definitions all over the place, right? This is the reason why we have Christians on both sides of every issue in our country, right? This is the reason why there's so many different denominations in the world. This is the reason why we can't get along. This is the reason why you watch the news sometimes and you're like, Christians did that? Are we a part of that? I'm not sure. Are we? This is why when you see those things, you're like, because here's the thing. I'll just be honest. The word Christian can mean a lot of different things. It can be a lot of different things. And nobody in the Bible you can't go to the Bible and be like, look, that's what it says a Christian is. That's the way Christians are and should and shouldn't be, because the Bible doesn't say anything about Christians except for the verse I just read you in Antioch where they said that they were called by the populace, by the people, Christians, because they themselves called themselves disciples. And disciple is a terrifying term, and it should disturb you because it's very clearly defined. Christian can mean a lot of different things. Disciple is very narrow. You can go to war, and people have, in the name of Christianity. People have done that. People have done all kinds of different things because you can define it, redefine it, misdefine it, undefine it. You can do all kinds of things with the word Christian. But I'm telling you, when you open up the New Testament and you begin to look at this, we find out that we're called to become disciples. So how do we know? And this is the exploration that we've been on, and we want to kind of bring you along in this. And Rachel mentioned a little bit about it, and I'll talk a little bit more about it at the end of the service here. But how do we then become a disciple? And what's the church's role? And what's your role? What's my role? What's your role? Like how do we become this thing that Jesus said? There was one thing. He said, when you go, I want to make you into something. And I would have thought Jesus would have said, I want to make you more successful or kinder. And he said, no. I want to make you into something. I want to make you, and I want you to go make disciples. So, as we begin to go through the New Testament and we begin to look at this, how do we become disciples? Because disciples of Jesus began to ask one another these questions. How do we respond in this situation? How should we respond to that situation? If you were me, what do you think how would he respond in these situations? And how would you react? And if this is your life, how do you manage your relationship and all these kinds of things? And so, see, that it begins to get a little bit more complex. So here's some examples throughout the New Testament. And this is how some of the versions got diluted. Some of the versions of Christian got diluted and watered down until it became this, well, why are you a Christian? And he's like, well, I got a cross, necklace, and how did we kind of water this thing down? Acts chapter 6 verse 7 says this: the word of God continued to spread, and the number of disciples increased greatly in Jerusalem. Now, obviously that's something we want. How do we do this? But how do we get there, right? And here's one about the Apostle Paul, Acts chapter 9 verse 26. When Paul came to Jerusalem, he attempted to join the disciples. Wasn't a church, wasn't this gathering, wasn't a rally. It was how do we join the disciples? And they were all afraid of them, for they didn't think that he really was a disciple. Why didn't they think he was a disciple? Well, because last week he was trying to kill them all. So we're kind of thinking, isn't there something in the book about like don't kill? I feel like there is, and you were, so this is awkward. And so then we begin to go on, and there's female disciples, which is so interesting because the way Jesus treated them, and even though they couldn't vote, and it's just brilliant the way all this begins to go. And so in Acts chapter 9, verse 36, now in Joppa there was a disciple named Tabitha, and she had equal standing with all of the disciples who Jesus called by name, because here's what made her a disciple. She was devoted to good works and acts of charity. See, this is where it begins to be terrifying, because the word disciple, we have clear definitions of. And it's a lot harder to do. And we make Christian pretty easy. Disciple is tough. Because here's what I know. I can hide behind the word Christian all day long. I can hide behind that. But who are these people who describe themselves differently? I mean, they referred to themselves. And so here's the question that we've got to ask, and we've been asking for a year, and we're going to kind of unpack and unpeel this. Are we disciples, or are we just Christian? Like, are we disciples of Jesus? Or is it just, I admire Jesus, so I'll just be called a Christian? I mean, that's a terrifying question. Because I can define and redefine Christian until it's something that become all kinds of things. But if we begin to embrace the insider term, which was disciple, then things really start to heat up for us. Because you embrace a standard that Jesus defines. And Jesus gave us the definition. And when you hear the word Christian, isn't it true? That can mean a lot of different things. Isn't it true you've heard Christians do things and say things and you've wondered, you're one? I don't want to judge. You are? Really? All right? John 13, I want to jump into Jesus' words because, man, this is so important, so powerful too, I think. When Jesus in John's gospel, and John is like his best friend, and he calls him the beloved and all these kinds of things. And when we get this, Jesus tells him this. He tells the disciples, he's looking at the disciples and he says, my children. He goes, my children, I will be with you I'm only going to be here a little bit longer. I'm only going to be here just a little bit longer, and you're going to look for me. And as I said to the Jews, so I say to you now, where I'm going, you can't come. And Peter pauses and he goes, whoa, wait a second. What do you mean I can't come? I left everything to follow you, and now you're telling me there's a level that I can't get to, I can't come to? And Jesus responds and he says, look. I give you a new commandment. Which means new, unused, strange, remarkable is this word here for new. I give you this remarkable commandment. And I would imagine Jesus starts looking around the room or looking around the circle or looking around the group, and maybe he points over there to Matthew and he goes, tax collector, I know. Remember Matthew? Yeah, you remember when we met Matthew? Matthew, do you remember what you were doing when the label people called you when I saw you? You were a tax collector, and that means you were a traitor. Matthew, you remember that? Well, of course I remember that. People hated you, Matthew. Peter, do you remember the day you met Matthew? Do you remember that, Peter? Do you remember the day you met Matthew? You remember how you didn't even want to talk to him? Because he was a traitor and you wouldn't even look him in the eyes and you just looked down at the fire. He was a tax collector. You remember how that used to be? Maybe he looks over at John and goes, John. You remember where we went? Remember we went up to Caesarea Philippi and we were at the center of pagan worship and you were so scared because you were afraid your mama was going to find out where you went and you'd be in trouble because your mama said, don't hang out with those kind of people. And here we were, we went right in the middle of those kinds of people. Do you remember the conflict between you guys? You remember that, Matthew, Peter, John, you remember that? Do you remember how you guys really, really were struggling with those things? And do you remember how we managed that? You remember how we managed the conflict? Do you remember how I loved Matthew? Remember how I treated him? Yeah, what's your point? We're good now. He goes, yeah, I know. But that's what I want you guys to do. I want you to love each other that way. Maybe keeps going. Hey, Nathaniel, remember the first day we met? You remember that? Remember? In fact, maybe some of you don't even remember the deal with Nathaniel, right? His brother, he was eyewitnesses, and Nathaniel said, Nathaniel. He comes up and he goes, Nathaniel, I've met the Messiah. And Nathaniel, do you remember what you said? Remember when your brother came and said that? You remember what you said? I remember. I mean, wouldn't this be terrifying if Jesus remembered what you said? And he does. But if Jesus remembered what you said and repeated it to you, and you're like, Nathaniel, remember what you said? Oh, let's not bring this up right now. Do we have to bring this up right now? He says, yeah, remember what you said? You said, can anything good come from Nazareth? I believe that was the direct quote that you said. Oh, can we just let it go? He goes, you dissed my entire family. Yeah, I know. And right after you dissed my entire family and you basically made fun of my entire town and belittled all of them, do you remember what I said to you? Do you remember how I treated you? Do you remember the way I responded and reacted to you? Do you remember what I said? Yeah, I know. Tell us, what did I say? You looked at me right after I dissed your family and you said, come follow me. And then I was one of the guys. That's how I want you to love other people. That's what a disciple does. You dissed my entire town. He said by this, verse 35, let's keep going in John. He says, because here's what you need to know. Everyone will know, be aware, that you are my disciples if you love one another that way. So, I know you're all Christians, right? But are you a disciple? Now, here's my favorite part of the passage. I think this is such an interesting thing because this is really, this is one of the things, I think this is the litmus test, the bottom line for the defining characteristics of, whether you sing or don't sing, or whether you pray out loud or pray quietly, all these things. This is the thing that begins to go. And Peter raises his hand. He goes, okay. So, no big, I hated Matthew. And Nathaniel, that was pretty dumb. I'm glad I didn't say it, right? Simon Peter raises his hand, verse 36, and says, Lord, can we get back to the issue? Yeah, we'll love each other. Great. Where are you going? I'm feeling a little bit left out. Does Andrew get to go? Or is it just Peter can't go? Where are you going? And Peter says this. He says, look, I'll go anywhere with you. I'll lay down my life for you. And Jesus looks him in the eyes and says, no, you won't. No, you won't. A couple hours later, a middle school girl asks Jesus, very intimidating middle school girl, asked Peter, and Peter denies Christ in front of this girl, and Peter's like, no, I'm willing to die for you. And Peter, look, Peter. Jesus says this, he's like, look, Peter, I don't want you to die for me. You're like, I'll die for you. I don't want you to die for me. You're following me. I don't even want you to go where I'm going right now. I want you, Peter, to do something that's way more difficult than coming with me and following me and going where I'm doing. I want you to do something that's way harder than doing that. I want you to love these guys for the rest of your life. And that's going to be way harder than following me to the next town, the next village, or where I'm going. I want you to do something much more difficult. I want you to love these guys. And so what we've been exploring, what we've been looking at is, are we Christian? Because Jesus called us to be disciples, and disciple is challenging. Really challenging. And so next week, Rachel talked about it, we're going to do something that's extraordinarily unique for us, okay? We're going to take an assessment at the end of the service. And when I say the word assessment, let me just kind of offer some qualifiers. First, it's anonymous. You don't put your name, your email address, so there's no IP, all that stuff. It's anonymous. And this isn't like, and just for you competitive people, like I want you to know, like there's not a way to pass it, okay? Oh, they want us to put this one. No, we don't. And for you that have test anxiety now, I also want you to know that you also can't fail it. Okay, so that's not what we're going for. You're gonna need to bring your phone next week that can read a QR code. For those of you that don't, have issues with that, we can also email that to you so you have this. But it's really, really important. It's going to take about 7 to 8 minutes to take, and we've been working on this for a long time with a lot of different people to kind of get this to where this is. Because here's what we want to do: if we as a church are going to follow the words of Jesus, which says we need to make disciples, then we need to have, that map at the mall. I don't know when the last time you were, I don't even know the last time I was at the mall, but let's say we were at a mall, and they have the map that says you are here. We need help defining that. Because we as church leaders and church staff, we need to know where we are so that we can help build pathways, multiple different pathways, to help people grow in their faith. And I know some of you are involved in small groups, and that's great. And I think small groups are really good at like developing community. It's a great way to make friends. But sometimes we can become so friendly with the people that we're in the groups with that it becomes a barrier actually to us becoming more and more like Christ, because we get a little too comfortable and we don't want to offend anyone, and we don't want to ask anybody tough questions about like, how are we loving each other, and how are you dealing with bitterness, and how are you dealing with her, and how are you dealing with the people in your life that you don't like. And how do we respond to that? And how do we have conversations with one another where we can disagree with one another but still love each other? And they're civil conversations. And we don't hide behind screens and just shoot off whatever we feel like is helpful. And so for us to help build pathways so that we can try something entirely new, where we help meet disciples, we need everyone to participate. And even, yes, online, you're with us, you're in on this. Next week, we're going to end the service just a couple minutes early so you can take it here in the service. And we want to take that data and we want to use that as sort of a baseline, okay? Because here's what we know about the world we live in. There will be another dust up. When? I don't know. I don't get into that. Not a conspiracy theory guy, no. I just know that, there was dust up, last week, so there might be one this week, right? There will be people you disagree with. There will be things that you just get upset. And I'm not saying I'm not saying that we shouldn't stand for things. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying any of that. I'm just saying the way that we treat the people that we disagree with matters. Because that's what a disciple of Jesus does. And I'll be the first to admit, sometimes Christians will wave a flag and condemn others. But disciples begin to say, Peter, you remember how much you hated Matthew? Yeah, he was a scumbag, dirty, no good, whatever. Okay, you all need to love each other. Well, I don't even like him. And this person insulted you. And Jesus says, look. Christian was a label put on you. I've called you to become and to be made into a disciple. Well, what does that mean? And we're all over the map. Some of you are ready for some stuff that's really going to stretch you and push you, and some of you are looking at the Bible, and I said open to Acts chapter 3, and you looked at this and went, I would love to, as soon as I figure out what all those little numbers are. And here's what I want you to know. We know that. We're so glad you're here, and we want to help you We want to help you so that you don't have to live your life like we talked about the last series off of emotion, but you have something to tether your life to, because the Bible shouldn't run your life. The Bible is said, the reason we have a Bible is because something happened. And what happened is Jesus came into the world because God sent him into the world so that we didn't have to live based off of what we were thinking and feeling on that day. But there would be a standard that we could begin to interact and participate into a world who disagrees with you. So, Christian's great. Not against Christian. But we were called to be something a little bit more challenging, which is disciple. Can I pray with you this morning? And today, here's what I want you to do as you're responding today, and we have response stations all around if this is your first time here. You can light a candle and go, you know what, I think I bought into Christian, but maybe I need to revisit the disciple. And you may want to light a candle and go, Jesus, I don't know if I'm in yet, but I'm going to think about this. Maybe today you need to pin something on the cross today and just say, God, here's some things that for me, I think this is a barrier that I have right now from being able to love certain kinds of people groups, and I just need to say that this morning. I need to get that out of my heart. And others of you may want to take communion and just thank God. Thank God that we were called for something more than the label that was put on us by pagans. We were called to be disciples of Jesus. And that puts us all like at the starting line going, okay, how do I begin to live and interact the way that my Heavenly Father, who sent his Son, died for me to live? Can I pray with you, Jesus, this morning? We want to respond to you in ways that are filled with grace and mercy. And we don't want to settle for Christian. We want to follow you to become a disciple, which means our life is going to have to be reprioritized. And we're going to have to start responding to some people differently in your name. We love you. Amen.
Thanks so much for joining us today. If you love the content you heard and you'd like to know when the new content becomes available, scroll down and like and subscribe to our channel. Again, thanks so much for being here today, and we can't wait to see you next week.